Welcome to this brief tutorial on how to find the protons, the electrons, and the atomic number of an element, as well as how to find the neutrons. Now, we've been studying the periodic table of elements in class. And so when you see a picture like this, it kind of looks like one of the things that you'll see in a periodic table of elements, one of those small squares. And the modern day periodic table actually has 118 of these. Now, some of the newer ones have just been discovered and are not officially named yet, but helium has been on the periodic table for quite some time. And when we look at this, we know what these different symbols mean. For example, this 2 right here. If you said, oh yeah, I know what that means, that's the atomic number. You are correct. We know that He is not the name of the element, but that's the symbol of the element. And we know it's helium, so obviously this is the name. And we know this right here is going to be the mass of the element. So how do we find the protons, the electrons, and atomic number, knowing that we can look on a periodic table and see this information? Well, there's 2 equations I want you to learn today. One is that protons equals electrons, which equals the atomic number. Now, some people might say, well, why don't you put the atomic number first? You could, but I like putting in this order PEA because it spells out one of my favorite vegetables, the pea. And because it's easy for me to remember, it's a mnemonic device, protons, electrons, the atomic number. I like peas, it's easy for me to remember. Some people will say, well, how about if you go the atomic number equals the protons equals the electrons, and it spells out ape. If that works for you, go ahead. So I'm going to use P. Now we know the atomic number is 2 for helium, right? So we know it's 2. And we know that from this equation right here, that protons equals the atomic number, which equals the electrons. So atomic number equals the electrons. And we know that the atomic number also equals the protons, which also means that electrons equals protons and protons equals electrons. So finding out the protons, electrons, and atomic number are pretty easy, as long as you know that they're all equal. But how do we find the neutrons? Now, to find the neutrons, I'm going to give you a different equation. It's going to be protons plus neutrons equals the mass. So when I look at this, I can see how many protons helium has, right? So helium, and I'll do the work right here. Helium has 2 protons. I have to add my neutrons. Now, what's the mass number? If I look here, it's 4.0026. We're going to round that, and that gets rounded to 4. Some students will ask me, well, do we round up or do we round down? Well, you round. If it was 4.5, you'd round it up. But because it's less than 4.5, we round down. Now, when you look at this, 2 plus n equals 4. Most of you are thinking, oh, it's 2. 2 plus 2 equals 4. But how would we solve this mathematically? And you've probably gone over this in math class already. Whatever we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other. So this actually cancels out. And what's 4 minus 2? If you said 2, that's right. So you're right. N does equal 2. Now, some of you might be thinking, wow, do these always equal each other? Why couldn't it just be protons plus or protons equals the electrons equals the atomic number equals the neutrons? Well, they don't always equal. For example, what is the 3rd element on a periodic table? If you said lithium, you are absolutely correct. Now, lithium has an atomic number of 3, but its mass, if we were to round its mass would be 7. So if I wanted to find the protons, the electrons, and the atomic number for lithium, it's pretty easy. It's 3. 3, 3, and 3. But now if all of a sudden I wanted to find the neutrons, how do I find it? Well, let me erase this a little bit right here. Do you remember how? What equation are we going to use? Do you remember what equation we're going to use? This one right here. So how many protons does lithium have? Do you remember? 3. So it's 3 plus n, and the atomic number is 3, but the mass is 7. Excellent. So what do I have to do to solve this? Well, I have to subtract because I want to isolate the n, so that cancels out. And minus 3, and what's 7 minus 3? 4. If you said 4, you are absolutely correct. So we can see now that they're not always going to be equal. There are a few where all these are going to be equal, but for the vast majority of the elements, they're going to be different. Now, let's say you didn't have this. Let's say this was taken away. But let's say you had this information here. From this, could you figure out what's the mass of helium? Well, let's just work the equation in reverse. If you didn't have this and you didn't know that helium was 4.0026, or we rounded that to 4, if you didn't know it was 4, how would you figure it out? Well, it's just protons plus neutrons. So if I add the protons 2 plus the neutrons 2, 2 plus 2 is 4. So even on a test or on a quiz, if I ask you to find the mass, but I give you the protons and the neutrons, you should be able to figure it out. You should be able to find that number. Now, as always, if you have any questions about how to find protons, electrons, the atomic number, or how to find the neutrons or the mass number, or any questions in general about chemistry, make sure you ask in class. I'm always willing to answer your questions. So hopefully this tutorial will help you study for the test. And again, good luck, and if you have any questions, please ask in class.